We're on.
We are. Good morning. It's Friday.
Here with
So
Grief in
relieved.
Practice.
Yes.
And I'm Debbie and
I'm Jill. And we do grief.
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Mhm.
Yep. You know what? How many times are you referred to as the grief lady?
Oh, more times than I can count. Although it's usually the crazy grief lady. Badge of honor.
When I worked in a hospital setting, I used to be, it's a grief lady who's going to make us cry.
Yeah, I promise now when I'm doing speaking gigs, I'm going to be the one that makes you laugh and then cry. Which
I like
is
it.
actually what happened. Yeah, I work with our DA's team who respond to homicides and vehicular homicide families. And we laughed all the way through the day. And then the last thing we did was I made everyone cry. And it was all good and they were grateful. So, right?
So you know what?
The spread.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about talking to you about this and of working with the helpers who are the ones that are out there showing up for at the scene. Can you describe more about who you've been working with in this population?
I spent this week with the district attorney's office. They have in their victims of crime program, they have people who support families who have faced all kinds of crimes. So this week it was those who've had loved ones who were murdered or died as a result of vehicular homicide. And next month it will be the ones who do the immediate and then the follow-up for folks who have had crimes that have resulted in deaths. And so that's a different kind. They are the ones who are the case carriers. So it's a different kind of group. And then I also occasionally work with funeral staff, and they sometimes are responding right to the scene as well. So it's a different group. It's not the actual, therapist doing the therapy, but they have to have some of the skills to be able to talk through the moment and to get people through and to help them see that they're grieving, not crazy, which is what all of us do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof. I know many years ago, I did a whole series of trainings with the DA's office down in San Diego of, and it was a really amazing training. We had people from different parts of the DA's office. We had attorneys, we had, the workers who were working with the families directly, and really wanting to educate them about being able to be as effective as they could, while also taking care of themselves.
And that's the other half of it was this is grief. This is what helps in grief. This is what doesn't help in grief. This is the difference between regular expected deaths, normal grief, and traumatic deaths, which has a totally different response that's innate to all of us. And then how do you take care of yourself while you're doing that work? And the cool part is we also had the DA's dog. So we had Rachel, the black lab, with us too. That was very cool. Rachel was checking on everybody throughout the day.
Excellent. And you and I are pet lovers and have them, with us, with our clients, is that I think that, the irony is that they humanize, the environment and kind of help people let their guard down.
Absolutely. I bring a stuffed dog when I'm doing these kinds of things when I can't bring my own. And so part of it is we talk about the people you're working with are more likely to tell their greatest fears and their greatest angers and their biggest angst to their dog, maybe their cat, because dogs have been bred over the centuries for those eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so I pass around my stuffed dog, and it just takes a moment for folks to go, oh, you're right. And you can just see their shoulders relax, even just looking at a stuffed animal.
I love that. Right? That's a great idea. Yeah. So I was just reading, I don't know if you've heard this book, book called When Professionals Weep. I love this. This is a good one. And and I was looking at the chapter of the horror and helplessness of violent death. And I think when you refer to sudden death, is that we know that there's a different physical literal impact to how did the person find out, to the suddenness of it and the horror. And there was this
piece. And then needing to know all the things. Yeah.
Yes. And so I might be jumping the gun, but this piece is about the countertransference in early interventions. And here's a line. It is doubly hard for responders who have teenage children because they are aware of the potential for risk and harm in a developmental age that seems to invite it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's something we talked about this week, and it's something that comes up with everybody we work with who is actually responding or working with folks who've been traumatized by sudden loss.
Yeah.
Because they absolutely know that until they're people in their own world who are still here are past that age, and it's not just teenagers. If they've got an ADHD child, it's going to be 25, right?
Yeah.
That their kid's at risk, and then we have to work on mitigating their fear and how much of that they take home with them.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we talk a lot about boundaries too. Like you have to work really hard at leaving work at work.
Yeah.
So it doesn't come home with you and splay all over your family with extra fear. It's justified to some degree, but magnified because of the work you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that it's not just one story. It's story after story after story. Yeah. I know you. Go ahead.
We did I do a candle ceremony sometimes after I finish groups like this, and I did one with this group. And I said, why don't we give thanks for one person that you have worked with or helped or stood by after a traumatic loss, pick one that really has touched your heart, and just honor them by saying their name. And there was such a struggle with them to figure out which one.
Oh.
And probably a quarter of them, it was somebody in their own family.
Yeah.
And so that, clearly the amount of loss these folks face in the course of a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is incredible. And they also, part of what we talked about was, how do you help somebody who's had a sudden traumatic, horrible loss, and they also have other losses going on, and real life is infringing, like there's, because we all know grief doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No.
So part of what I do is referrals to dementia care and medical care and mental health care for other people and suicide support groups, like all the things that happen to the families they're working with, in addition to they just had a loved one murdered or a loved one killed by a DUI, right? Or this morning in LA, we had a crash where there was a chase and somebody crashed into someone else, and then there was a shooting. Like that family of that person, they're facing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. I don't think that.
And then they also, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, oops, we might have lost Jill. Oh, Jill's back. I don't think any significant loss is simple as opposed to complicated, but I think that there are certainly different degrees of multi-dimensions of complication and different pieces that we have to pay attention to.
Yeah. One of the things this group brought up, because we had people who work with juveniles too, families who've had juvenile losses at the hands of other juveniles. And so for those folks, the complication is, I feel horrible for the family of the child who did this to my child.
Yeah.
Right? Those families are struggling with both the loss of their child and the fact that somebody else's family is facing the loss of the child through the justice system.
Yeah.
And it was a child who did this.
Yep.
And how much do we want rehabilitation versus punishment? And was their child involved in activity, the one who died, that helped lead to this? And so could their child have also done some of this to somebody else's child? They don't know. All the things.
Yes.
Right. And these folks are working with these people.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's one of many legal ramifications or impacts is that we've had families that have worked with victims of crime, and then the person who was killed, in the investigation, they figure out that it was their fault. And so then they're told that they can't receive help from victims of crime.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they were implicated in it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And all of a sudden your loved one that you're grieving is a bad guy.
Right.
Nobody needs to hear that. They've still died.
Right.
And they still deserve support, but the system is set up. They have to find support elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then they face the judgment of other people.
Absolutely. And their own helplessness of, I wasn't able to stop this. I wasn't able to change it. I wasn't able to protect them. Yeah.
I talked to my child a million times and they just didn't hear the words.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all have those thoughts. We've anybody who's raised a child, I don't know anybody who hasn't had at least one moment, right, where they've been in fear of what their child might pull because they're kids.
Right. I would imagine it would be more than one moment. I had
tons.
Yeah. I don't have any children, but I will tell you, I was very grateful that I was able to reach some kind of sanity after my adolescence and be able to apologize and appreciate my parents who said,
that's one of the things go ahead.
Yeah. Who said really that the only reason I didn't die is because they weren't mad at me on the same day.
I've had more adult kids need to come and say apologies to parents who were dying. That's one of the things we do is I've got to go apologize.
Yeah.
Right. And usually the parents like, I barely remember that, but clearly it made an impact on the child who knew that they were up to no good.
Yeah. Yeah. And who needed to be held accountable. Yeah. And I think the accountable piece, I'll segue over to there, for people who are experiencing somebody who's died from a sudden loss, from violent death, is that drive of through the legal system of, I want to make sure that this person is held accountable, and
owns
how,
up to it.
Yeah. And also how consuming that can be too.
It can be. It can be multiple court dates, a driving need to be there for all of them. There's also what goes with that is what happened. I want to know what my loved one felt. I want to know if they knew what was coming. I want to know all the things.
Yeah.
And it can take so long to get that information. And what's hard for the supporters who are in the system is they may know that information, but they cannot share it because there's a trial coming.
Yeah.
And so they're caught between knowing and not sharing and seeing what this is causing for the survivors.
I would imagine the heaviness of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, coroner's reports can take up to several years to be finally released. And the family's not allowed to see it until it's done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really hard.
Yeah. Tell me what other factors that go into the reactions of supporters, of the helpers that are showing up. Tell me what other factors.
Feel helpless. They feel helpless a lot of the time because they can't take away the pain. They can't undo a murder.
Yeah.
They are hopeful that they can get someone to the other side of the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what they live for, is being able to see the other side.
Yeah.
They are devastated for
Mm-hmm.
families that are having to walk through this process.
Yeah.
They're frustrated at times with law enforcement or
Mm-hmm.
other parts of the court system.
Mm-hmm.
They universally hate the word continuance because with every hearing, they have to be at the
delayed.
hearing with the loved ones who were there, and then they're the ones who have to explain why it is that, the 13th hearing is being continued again.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are also team members who are the ones who respond to life without parole hearings,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still parole being considered.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are hearings about that, and they have to accompany the families, who will sometimes come away hearing that the person who murdered their loved one actually gets to leave prison. And they feel traumatized for the families with that process too, because promises were made and not kept.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of relief when the court process is over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they also still maintain ties with these families even after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll get a call 1 or 2 years later, and clearly somebody is still struggling, or a couple is doing grief differently, and they want the supporters
Mm-hmm.
to help them navigate between the family member who wants to be at the cemetery every day and the
Mm-hmm.
family member who's done the grief and wants to be able to take a vacation.
Right. Yeah.
But the one who wants to be at the cemetery can't leave the cemetery long enough to go on vacation.
Yeah.
And who do they call? They call their supporter, who's walked them through the process.
Yeah. Because they know the
So
story. Yeah.
They know the story. They don't have to retell it. If they see a therapist, they have to tell the story again.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
It's exhausting too.
It is exhausting, and I think when I do have a course on on grief, clinician grief, helping professional grief and burnout, because we know grief is what creates the burnout and creates the compassion fatigue and the vicarious trauma, otherwise known as secondary trauma. I know when I worked at a rape center, that I used to come home, and I used to call it, oh my gosh, I think I have secondary PTSD, because it brings up our own vulnerabilities too.
Yeah.
And how do we know when that's when we're kind of bleeding all over the place?
Right. How do we know when with these folks it's they share some of the same traumatic response, which is everything you know to be true is no longer true.
Yeah.
Nothing is really safe. Nobody is ever fully safe. Right. All of those things.
All of those ways that you can't, the people in that situation and who hear that over and over again, which many of us do, is you can't create what I call that safety delusion as easily. You can't.
Right.
It's like, wait, if I go outside and I go out into the world, something bad might happen. And in that delusion of, no, I think everything will be okay, and that's completely shattered after significant losses, and I think especially so in sudden and violent loss.
And when it's completely like out of the blue, my loved one went to the grocery store.
Right.
And never came home.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
the grocery store should be safe.
Right. Yes. Okay. And then, when somebody else in the family goes to the grocery store and they're, 5 minutes later than they thought they were supposed to be. And holy shit.
Speed dial.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the responders too. These supporters have to really battle that.
Right.
How do I feel safe?
Yeah.
right? And so they have to do, we did a lot of self-talk
Mm-hmm.
and messaging
Mm-hmm.
work yesterday, because they needed to really have that, I can talk myself through this. How do I get ready to go out and meet with the family?
Mm-hmm.
And then after I've left the family, what do I do with myself?
So you know what? So can you share one, 2 or 3 examples that I think you already are in talking about this that might be helpful for anyone listening?
So to get ready to go out and meet with the
Mm-hmm.
family, if you're working with those providers,
Mm-hmm.
they need to be able to be really effective at discerning what helps them center.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, it's music. For some people, it's ocean noises. For some people, it's a podcast that's got an upbeat message. For some folks, it's a book that's got some inspiring messages.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is to help them, so by the time they arrive, their head's in the game.
Yeah.
But they've protected their heart a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
they're able to be there and hold the family up,
Mm-hmm.
but not put too much of themselves out.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
then on the way back,
Mm-hmm.
how do you leave that behind?
Yeah.
What do you do? So we did some stretching, some breathing. We went outside on this. Our DA's office has a spectacular 10th floor conference room that has a
Mm-hmm.
wraparound patio. And so we went on the patio. Here's the
Nice.
sunshine, because sunshine does a lot for resetting our brains. We know that. So does
Yeah.
breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we did some of that. I use blow bubbles, because blow bubbles force us
like
to
blow
focus
bubbles.
our air.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're fun.
And
And
they're
oh, by the
fun.
way, Rachel likes blow bubbles.
Ah.
So we had fun with blow bubbles with Rachel the dog. Right. Because you gotta have fun while you're doing this stuff, right?
Exactly.
And I brought chocolate, because chocolate fixes everything as
There
far
you
as I'm
go.
concerned.
I like that.
Yeah.
Good.
So those are the kinds of things we talked about, and those are the things we can do as helpers of the helpers.
Mm-hmm.
We can have chocolate on our desks or on our tables, or suggest that someone have some chocolate in the house, and we can do breathing, and we can do stretching. And I do that online. I do a whole lot of stretching stuff, and I make my clients do it with me.
Yep.
Because that way we can center.
Those are great ideas. I know I like to sometimes I'll have often I'll have people do a letter or an empty chair of what would they want to say. Who are they more preoccupied with of a family that they've worked with, so that they can release that before, to be able to develop a ritual so they can do that before they go home or before they go in the house.
I like that. Yeah. I also shared that, because I do a lot of end of life work with clients and chronic illness work. And so that means you lose clients.
Yeah.
So I have in my book of success, at the back of it, there's a little one-line description of clients that I've lost, so I can remember something special about them and release them.
That's beautiful.
And that is something that these folks can do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Not enough that anybody would violate anybody's. If someone found it after we all died, no one will know who I'm talking about. But it's there.
Yep.
Yep.
Nice. Acknowledged and blessed. Yeah.
Right. Because these folks can't go home and talk about their day at work in great detail.
Right.
There's court coming, and there's confidentiality, and then there's traumatizing. That's like third-hand trauma for the family.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And we don't need to do that to people.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And we also talk a lot about how do you use your colleagues, because a lot of the research on doing work with trauma survivors as the providers is teams are the number one way folks find support.
Absolutely.
And not debriefing with supervisors, debriefing with their peer group.
Yes.
Supervisor could be included, but it's got to be the peer group.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the peer
or the dog
is is really important, because they know that their peers get it. and they're not going to get evaluated or judged.
Right.
Yeah.
And I had supervisors in with us, and I said to them, the way you handle your teams is well they do and will mitigate their trauma with the work that they're doing with you. But you need to encourage the team time and the team laughter and the twisted sense of humor that every group that does this kind of work has. Right?
The most morbid sense of humor. And and that there is that gallows humor, but that there's also the ability to be able to find some lightness too. Yeah.
Yeah, a dark sense of humor is a really good sign of good mental health for folks who do trauma work.
Yes,
as long as they keep it in the appropriate place. Well, you can't tell those jokes with other people. Just like hospice and therapists and CPS workers, it all has to stay in the group.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? I think this is kind of, I don't want to make this a whole hour. Okay. I think, just a good kind of resting spot for this for now.
I think so.
Okay.
And if anyone needs resources, come to Debi's group online. The private practice grief is a great place to find resources.
Thank you. And I also know I love your website. I love your tools and resources that you have. And all that you have at jilljohnson.com. jilljohnsonyoung.com. Okay.
Yeah. Good. And there'll be more up there now because every time I find stuff, I send them to my VA to get it posted up.
I know. I'm really excited. Actually, I like to
website.
I like to update my resources for different subjects each year. And so I'm about to rehaul for my resources for 2023.
It's a lot of effort, but you got to do it.
Exactly.
And I can't wait because I'm going to go mine all of it.
So, what do you have coming up that we can tell people about?
I will be in Greenville, South Carolina at the Royal Connections Conference next Friday. And so if you're not registered and you live near there, please come join us. It includes a royal gathering. So I will be in drag because I will be wearing a big floofy dress and a big wig. And it is totally drag for me because I don't wear dresses. And then I'll be at ADEC in April, and I'll be at the International Death, Grief, and Bereavement Conference in La Crosse, Wisconsin in June. Excellent. How about you?
Excellent. I have actually on February 24th, I start another 4-week clinician grief and burnout group that I really like combining information about grief and about the impact that it has on us. And a really, really big part of it really is about providing support and providing, a safe place for helpers to be able to let their guard down. We just finished one a couple weeks ago, and it was amazing. It was awesome.
Oh, I heard great things about it.
Thank you. It was really, really great. I was very, very excited about it. So I've got that coming up. And I think I'm going to release it this weekend. I just found that there was an article that was published 3 weeks ago now, but I just found it in this last week through National Board of Certified Counselors. I have an article there, interview about kind of the basics of grief and some information about for counselors. So I'm really, really excited about that.
It's a terrific article. If you haven't read it, you really need to. Right? And then we also have our Friday Grief Chat on my Humor, Grace, and Grief Facebook page.
Yes.
And we've been having some fabulous guests, and that's now up on podcast. So you can find the podcast link there as well.
Excellent. And I can't wait.
I think we're busy.
Yeah. I think so. Well, there's a lot of grief in the world, and a lot of people needing to be heard and seen and laughed with. So, all right.
I'm so glad we get to do the work. Thank you, my friend. I will see you next time.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.